Last week, the leaders of South Korea and Japan were both in New York for the UN General Assembly, but the global event ended without much progress and mending strained Seoul-Tokyo ties. Rather, the two leaders blamed each other for worsening bilateral relations while addressing the UN. Adding fuel to the fire, Japan has released its annual defense white paper, making false territorial claims over South Korea's Dokdo Island for the 15th consecutive year, and has even hinted at possible military actions when conflict breaks out over the skies of Dokdo. Today, we go in-depth on Seoul-Tokyo relations that look far from thawing with Dr. Won-gon, professor of international studies at Handong Global University. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me again.
So as expected, there were no South Korea-Japan summit in New York last week, and rather the two leaders pointed finger at each other while addressing the United Nations. What do you make of their statements made during their respective keynote speech at the UN?
Well, as you said, it is kind of expected that there would be a no summit between South Korea and Japan, but although very few people mentioned that there might be a chance to meet these two leaders in the United Nations, but it found out that was not the case. As you are saying that our president, Moon Jae-in, when he made the address in the United Nations, he mentioned about Japan, but not explicitly. I just will read about what he mentioned. Quote, "We'll be able to make further progress when we cooperate while safeguarding the values of trade and fair trade upon the foundation of an honest self-reflection on past history." As I told you already, he didn't mention about the word Japan, but we all know that he definitely pointed out the Japanese wrongdoing, especially the economic retaliation. On the other hand, Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, he also, when he had the interview with the press, he said that he's a kind of criticized South Korea's, he said, unilateral termination of GSOMIA, the military intelligence pact between South Korea and Japan. And also in his summit, Prime Minister Abe Shinzo's summit with the President Trump, and it is allegedly known that Japanese Prime Minister raised the issue of this trilateral cooperation among South Korea, Japan, and United States, which means that it's kind of criticized indirect way that South Korea is to terminate the GSOMIA. So it's kind of still we are seeing that kind of dispute between South Korea and Japan.
So the sentiment is still bitter between the two nations. South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa met with Japan's new Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi for the first time in New York, but their talks also ended only to confirm the wide gap that still exists between the two countries. How did you see their talks?
Well, you're right. These two sides just reiterate the positions, which means that South Korea will definitely criticize Japanese the economic retaliation. On the other hand, Japan said that South Korea is violate 1965 agreement, and South Korea government should be responsible for this, our Supreme Court's decision on the compensation about labor forces. So I can see that still there is a huge difference between two countries. But at the same time, there's kind of a little bit hope I can see, because they are saying, especially the Minister Kang Kyung-hwa said that they are going to continue to talk. These two, the ministers of foreign affairs, and she said that we agreed to continue communication and consultation at every level of these diplomatic channels, including at the minister level. I think this dialogue and the negotiation is very important, because at this moment we haven't had any kind of a meaningful dialogue. Although this time they are for the first time meet, because this you just mentioned the Toshimitsu Motegi got the position earlier of this month, but so this is their first time. But if they are continue to meet, and there would be some chance to come up with some kind of solution. So important thing is to continue to talk and continue dialogue with each other.
Could you tell us a bit more about Japan's new foreign minister? Who is he? What kind of tendency does he have? And do you expect some changes to Japan's foreign policy, especially towards South Korea?
Well, because the former Japanese the Japanese foreign minister, and he got lots of criticism by South Koreans, because Gonodaro, and he's kind of make a strong word against South Korea. So we have some kind of expectation that because newly appointed the foreign ministers might have a different position, but it found out that he's very close to Abe. And he also very clearly mentioned that he's definitely go with, there is no difference between his own opinion and the Prime Minister Abe, which means that he clearly mentioned that South Korea has violated the 1965 agreement. But at the same time, he said that he emphasized the importance of talk. And about his background, he was a former economic and fiscal policy minister, and just before he got the minister position, he was the chief negotiator with the United Nations, the trade issue. So he's a very good negotiator, and he's put emphasis on the negotiation dialogue. So, and another thing is that these foreign affairs, if they lead this whole issue, then we can have some positive, we can expect some positive, some kind of outcome. Because until now, this foreign minister is kind of out of this process. The Prime Minister Abe Shinzo himself led this issue. So there is no room to maneuver and no room to negotiation between these foreign ministers. So we have to have a negotiation. Once again, I put emphasis on this dialogue.
Meanwhile, Japan released its defense white paper, upsetting South Korea for the 15th straight month. But what's different this year is that Japan hinted at possible military actions in case of a conflict over the skies of Dokdo Island, to which it once again made false territorial claims to. What is Japan aiming for?
Yeah, right. Since 2005, the Japanese defense white paper reiterate the sovereignty over Dokdo Island, which is very absurd. Definitely, that's the South Korean territory. The South Korean territory, that's period. But this time, you just mentioned that this is because of the Russians' intrusion on the South Korea's our airspace back in July 23rd. At the time, South Korean jet fighter, we have this warning shot against the Russian surveillance flight. So at the time, probably you remember that Japanese government very severely criticized South Korean government because they claim that this over the Dokdo Island is their territorial airspace. So this defense paper mentioned that if those kind of things happen again, so that means if Russia or China intrude over the Dokdo Island territorial space, and they might be chance to launch their fighter jet over this territory. I think that if really realized, and that could be a very dangerous movement, because if Japanese jet fighter come to our territorial airspace, we definitely, our Korean jet fighter should go there, and there might be some kind of the military conflict between these two countries. So I'm kind of worried about that.
Quite alarming indeed. During last week's South Korea-U.S. summit in New York, Seoul's decision to terminate GSOMIA wasn't brought to the table. What is Washington's current stance on this?
I kind of expected that one too, because President Trump, he hasn't mentioned about the GSOMIA at all. He just mentioned about this current dispute, South Korea and Japan once in June, if I remember correctly, June 19th. He said that it's going to be his huge burden if he decides to have some kind of arbitrator or mediator between these two countries. It's kind of a negative view about this dispute. And he didn't mention about this termination of GSOMIA at all. So this time we expect that President Trump didn't bring this issue. Rather, he's probably have some kind of cost and benefit calculation. He's always over all his foreign policy and the external policy, he's have a cost and benefit calculation. Can United States take advantage about this dispute and between South Korea and Japan? So he brought about this weapon, U.S.-made weapon, in his the speech when President Trump met our President Moon Jae-in. But we have to think about that. President Trump and other officials, American officials, especially Department of Defense and Department of State, they have a different view about this GSOMIA. So already this Assistant Secretary of State, David Stilwell, he mentioned that South Korea, and he's kind of asked South Korea to revoke the decision to terminate GSOMIA. That's the last day is November 22nd. And also he said that he is trying his best to come up with some kind of solution to resolve the dispute between South Korea and Japan. So we have to think about this President Trump's position and attitude and perception, and also the American officials.
Now, China has reportedly said it will take on a mediating role between Seoul-Tokyo to ease tensions. According to Nikkei, Chinese ambassador to Japan, Kong Xuanyou, expressed concerns over the tension, saying that he will take on a mediating role. How do you see this?
Well, it's kind of not that common situation, because the relationship with China, I mean, relationship between South Korea and China they're not that good. Still, China has, because of that issue, they maintain some kind of retaliation, and very recently China raised that issue again. And also, in terms of the relationship between China and Japan, although on surface they are very good, but they are more like the arch rivalry for a very long period of time. They could not have a good relationship. So I think China has some kind of intention to saying this kind of, wanted to play the arbitrary rule. First, they want to extend their sphere of influence in Northeast Asia, because South Korea and Japan both are the allies of the United Nations. If China plays some kind of arbitrary rule, that kind of undermine the U.S. influence in Northeast Asia. That's their first intention. And second intention is going to be still, because of the Japanese economic retaliation against South Korea, it hurt, we call the global value or supply chain. And if it continued and deepened, it will hurt Chinese economy too. So they are thinking about these two intentions.
So it's a careful calculation of major political and economic reasons. How can South Korea make use of these movements from regional players in resolving the tensions?
Well, at this moment, still I cannot see any breakthrough. It's very difficult, some kind of impasse that we are facing at this moment. But one of the solutions would be using United States, because as I told you, the Stilwell Assistant of Secretary of the United States, he's trying his best to come with some kind of solution. So at this moment, Japan has refused any kind of talk with and negotiation with South Korea. So we can ask the United States to make some kind of negotiation, chance to come up with these three countries, trilateral negotiation or trilateral talk, put the issues of GSOMIA, the forced labor issue, and also Japanese economic retaliation. I think at least undersecretary level or the secretary ministerial level is best. Then we can talk the all three issues, because that is pretty much mingled together. So that's one of the ways that we can come up with some kind of breakthrough.
When do you expect the breakthrough and the meaningful talks to come, though? I mean, there is a coronation ceremony of Japanese Emperor Naruhito set for next month. Can we expect something by then?
Well, I don't think our president will go to this ceremony, because still we need some kind of talk before actually we have a summit between South Korea and Japan. So some people raise that the President Moon Jae-in had think about the possibility to go there, but until we don't have time. If our president would go there, we have to have some kind of a negotiation with at least some working level. But still, as I told you, Japan has refused any kind of talk with South Korea. So as I told you, we have to we have to get close cooperation with the United States to have at least get start of this kind of negotiation.
All right, thank you, Dr. Park, for your analysis tonight.
Thank you.